Okay, back to meeting. There we go. So again, Chag Sameach, Erev Tov. Welcome everyone who is watching us in the non-Zoom format. Tonight's topic may have been a little boldly stated, but I wanted to spend a little time exploring how the rabbis thought we ought to interact with each other, where they saw limitations on behavior, and what happens if you went outside the bounds. So some of these texts are kind of classic, which means that they may be familiar. Hopefully we will reinforce our understanding of them and perhaps even see some things that we did not previously notice in them. So it is probably not much of a chiddush, of a novel insight to suggest that we live in a world that is filled with differences. And in point of fact, our tradition embraces difference and elevates it, so much so that there are times when we see great diversity and we're called upon to say a bracha to acknowledge the remarkable diversity of creation. And that includes the diversity of human beings. But there's also a reality that diversity can breed disagreement and discord. We live together in a world that is feeling increasingly polarized. And how do we navigate the sometimes very real and very significant differences that exist amongst us? And how do we engage in that conversation and in that debate in a manner that is apt, appropriate, and fitting? So perhaps the most classic source on this comes from Pirkei Avot, and I'm going to start sharing my screen. And here's a way, I think. How is that clear for you guys reading on the screen?
It's clear, could be bigger, but
yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to make it bigger.
Could be my eyes.
Individually, people can at the top click on view options, and we just did like 150% and it's perfect.
Okay, so I will leave it to each of you to make it more. What? Oh, my tech support is here, so she's going to make it a little bigger for me too. Please. No, I think. Here we go. Okay. Mine's bigger too. Cool. Yofi.
It's much better.
Man plus. Okay. Cool. Thank you. So this is a classic text in Pirkei Avot, which reads, Kol machloket shehi l'shem shamayim, every dispute that is for the sake of heaven will in the end endure. Right? And by the way, there's two aspects of this which are intriguing to me. One is the idea that the machloket itself, the debate, the discourse, the discussion will in fact in itself endure because it has inherent value. If it is a machloket, if it is a dispute, a disagreement, a discourse that is for the sake of heaven, which is, I know, a very nebulous term that we have yet to define. Right? While as those that are not for the sake of heaven will not endure. Right? The Mishnah then asks, which is the controversy that is for the sake of heaven? Such was the controversy of Hillel and Shamai, and we're going to look at some examples of that in a moment. And which is the controversy that is not for the sake of heaven? Such was the controversy of Korach and all his congregation. Okay. The disputes, the disagreements between Hillel and Shammai and the schools of Hillel and Shammai are legend, both literally and figuratively. And we're going to, as I said, look at some in a moment. But I thought the story of Korach may be a little less familiar. So let's take a look at that one first and see why it fits the category and the paradigm for the rabbis of controversies that are not for the sake of heaven. Okay. I will note that modern biblical scholars have noted that the chapter here, 16, and its continuation in chapter 17 are really kind of a mishmash of several different narratives of rebellion against Moses and Aaron. So I don't want us to get too bogged down in the details, but I do want us to sort of glean what it is that Korach is fighting about, if you will, or arguing about. Now Korach, son of Itar, son of Kohat, son of Levi, betook himself along with Datan and Aviram, the sons of Eliav, and On, the son of Pelet, descendants of Reuben, to rise up against Moses, together with 250 Israelites, chieftains of the community, chosen in the assembly, men of repute. They combined against Moses, and Aaron said to them, "You have gone too far, for all the community are holy, all of them, and the Lord is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourselves above the Lord's congregation?" Okay, so what do we glean from these opening verses in the story of Korach? Okay, who is Korach relative to Moshe, and what's his vetch, if you will?
Isn't Korah from the same family that Moses is from?
He's first cousins.
Is he jealous?
You tell me. How does he sound?
Angry.
He sounds angry. All right. And what is he accusing Moses and Aaron of doing?
Trying to take over everything.
Okay. Well, who decides to put Moses in charge?
According to Korach, Moses.
Well, according to Korach, Moses, according to the rest of the Torah,
God.
God. Yes, I know it sounded like a trick question. It was really a very simple question. All right. So the decision to elevate Moses and Aaron into positions of leadership and authority are in fact decisions made not by Moses. And if you remember, those of us who studied last night, Moshe was not exactly eager to take on this task. All right. What's Moshe's reaction? When Moses heard this, he fell on his face. Then he spoke to Korach and all his company, saying, "Come morning, the Lord will make known who is his and who is holy, and will grant him access to himself. He will grant access to the one he has chosen. Do this, you, Korach, and all your band. Take your fire pans, and tomorrow put fire in them and lay incense on them before the Lord. Then the man the Lord chooses, he shall be holy. You have gone too far, sons of Levi." Right? Essentially, Moshe flips the accusation back onto Korach. The very thing that you are accusing me of is in fact the thing that you are guilty of. You are seeking, what is it that Korach wants? Peel away all the verbiage. What's Korach looking for here?
He wants Moses's job.
He wants Moshe's job. Not even entirely clear that Moshe always wants Moshe's job, but Korach clearly wants Moshe's job. The question is why?
Power, prestige.
All right. So Moses said further to Korach, "Hear me, sons of Levi, is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has set you apart from the community of Israel and given you access to him to perform the duties of the Lord's tabernacle and to minister to the community and serve them? Now that he has advanced you and all your fellow Levites with you, do you seek the priesthood too?" It's like you live a very elevated life. You are in an elite, unique group within Israelite society, and somehow that remains insufficient for you. And if you don't like the hierarchical structure, understand that it is against the Lord that you and all your company have banded together. For who is Aaron that you should rail against him? Okay. I'm going to skip over the Datan and Aviram part for now, because I want to stay focused on Korach. Moses was much aggrieved, and he said to the Lord, "Pay no regard to their oblation. I have not taken the ass of any one of them, nor have I wronged any one of them." Right? Korach, and especially Datan and Aviram in the little section we skipped over, accused Moses of enriching himself at the cost of the Israelites. Right? So Moshe is going like, "Don't, God, you know I didn't do any of that." Right? But what does it tell you about the intentionality of Datan and Aviram?
They're followers.
Well, they're followers, but they're also seeing dollar signs. Right? They think Moshe has become quite affluent in his position. There's absolutely nothing to indicate anything of the sort, but they're assuming that this is going to be kind of an easy ride or a free ride to Easy Street. All right. I want to skip down to verse 19. Korach gathered the whole community against them at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Then the presence of the Lord appeared to the whole community, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "Stand back from this community that I may annihilate them in an instant." But they, Moses and Aaron, fell on their faces and said, "O God, source of the breath of all flesh, when one man sins, will you be wrathful with the whole community?" Right? What's God's take on this little insurrection?
One bad apple spoils the bunch.
One bad apple seems to spoil the bunch, and Moshe and Aaron, despite being the primary targets of Korach and the people that Korach has rallied against them, are actually the ones who lead to the defense of the nation as a whole. Right? One of the questions that I'm going to leave on the table for the moment is, why is God angry at the entire community when in fact it seems Korach, Datan, Aviram, and this group of 250 elders are the ones who are in the forefront of the attack on Moses's and Aaron's authority?
Because the rest of the community didn't speak up.
Yeah, I'm going to accept that for the moment, and we're, like I said, we're going to return to that question or that answer in a little bit. Okay, so for Pirkei Avot, for that Mishnah that we started with, the example of a controversy, of a dispute that is not for the sake of heaven, is the one described here because it is ultimately self-serving. And in fact, there's an intriguing little midrash. If you look here, the beginning, the list of people, it's Korach, Datan, Aviram, and this fellow named On. Okay, On disappears in the rest of the story. So the question is, what happens to On that he suddenly is gone from our narrative? When at the beginning he seemed to be part of the leadership of this insurrection against Moses and Aaron. So there's a cute little midrash. On comes home and tells his wife what he's been doing. Yeah, I joined Korach and Datan and Aviram, and we're leading the attack on Moses because Moses is blah, 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 blah. And his wife basically says to him, so tell me something. You're going to rebel against Moses, who brought us out of Egypt and blah, 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 blah. And you're going to replace Moses with Korah. And how are you going to be any better off now than before? And On basically looks at his wife and says, Taki, you're right. Replacing Korach, Moses with Korach benefits me not at all. If anything, maybe I'm in worse shape because what if, as we see, God sides with Moses? Right? So On realizes that this pursuit of power is really not in the best interest either for him or the people, and therefore he bows out, and in the process ultimately saves his life. Okay, so now I want to come back down a little bit, right? Okay. There's a medieval scholar named Ovadia Bartanura. Yes, the guy for whom the wine is named. He, like Rashi in his day, was a vintner in order to make a living. Right? But amongst the things that he wrote was a commentary to the Mishnah. Right? And this is what he has to say on our Mishnah. Every argument that is for the sake of heaven's name, it is destined, literally, its end is to endure. That is to say, that the parties to the argument are destined to endure and not perish, as with the argument between Hillel and Shamai, whereby neither the students of the school of Hillel nor the students of the school of Shammai perished, but Korach and his congregation perished. And I heard the explanation of its end in its purpose is its purpose that is sought from its subject. I apologize, the English is a little awkward. And with the argument for which is for the sake of heaven, the purpose and the aim that is sought from that argument is to arrive at the truth. And this endures like that which they said, from a dispute the truth will be clarified. And as it became elucidated from the argument between Hillel and Shammai, that the law was like the school of Hillel, and with the argument which is not for the sake of heaven, its desired purpose is to achieve power and the love of contention, and its end will not endure, as we found in the argument of Korach and his congregation, that their aim and ultimate intent was to achieve honor and power, and the opposite was achieved. Right? So it sort of he affirms in his commentary that which several of you suggested was what Korach was pursuing. Whereas for Bartanura, he said he sees the intent of the conflict, the discord, the disagreement, the debate between Hillel and Shammai as being an ongoing desired attempt to figure out an ultimate question, which is, what does God want? Remember that we often read the Mishnah and subsequent rabbinic literature as conclusions, right? how do you observe Shabbat? Blah, 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 blah. How do you observe Pesach? Blah, 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 blah. How do you observe Shavuot? Blah, 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 blah. All right. It's the instruction book. It's the manual of how to do Jewish. Right? But what is it that they are ultimately saying when they say you should observe Shabbat this way, you should observe Shavuot this way? What really undergirds the entire endeavor of rabbinic process? It's shorthand sometimes, but ultimately what we are saying, what every person who engages in halacha is attempting to do is figure out the answer to the question of what is it that God wants? What does God want me to do? And when I answer that question, or when the Mishnah answers that question, or the Gemara answers that question, or Rambam or any rabbinic figure answers that question at any point in history, what they are ultimately saying is, I, in both an act of humility and incredible chutzpah simultaneously, am saying to you that this is what I believe God wants you to do. So the process of argument, of debate, of trying to understand the intent of the Torah is really the process of trying to understand the divine mind and the divine intent so that I can conform to it as best possible. And the purpose of discussion and debate is to try to figure that out, recognizing that we as finite human beings are limited in our capacity to understand God's mind. On one level, hubris makes us attempt that. Humility ought to suggest I've got to be really, really careful when I make statements in God's name. So we saw here that, so that was Bartanura sort of giving us a sense of why the schools of Hillel and Shamai have remained essential learning, and Korach has essentially been relegated to the Torah portion that bears his name that we read perfunctorily once a year on Parshat Korach. So let's now look at some of the disputes between Hillel and Shammai. This is from Masechet Ketubot. Masechet Ketubot deals with, amongst other things, the ketubah as a document of marriage. And at the same time, it deals with a great many other issues related to marriage, including when you're invited to a wedding, what do you say? Right? Beit Shammai say one recites praise of the bride as she is, emphasizing her good qualities. And Beit Hillel say one recites a fair and attractive bride. Beit Shammai respond to Beit Hillel. Let's go. I'll just read the section, then we'll break it down a little bit. In a case where the bride was lame or blind, does one say with regard to her a fair and attractive bride? But the Torah states, keep you from a false matter. All right. So what are Hillel and Shammai really arguing about here?
How to compliment the bride.
How do you compliment the bride? And, Shammai, the school of Shammai are basically saying, you kind of got to hew close to the truth. You shouldn't say something that seems inherently less than truthful and forthright. find the quality of the bride that you can praise, even if it's kind of lame. It's like, Mazel Tov, you married a wonderful cook. That might be true. And that might even be a wonderful quality to have in your bride. I don't know anyone who's ever said that at a chuppah.
White lies don't work, right? That's what you're saying.
Well, the school of Shammai are a little more sticklish about certain things. The school of Hillel seems a little less so. All right, so the argument continues. Beit Hillel respond to Beit Shammai, according to your statement with regard to one who acquired an inferior acquisition from the market, should another praise it and enhance its value in his eyes, or condemn it and diminish its value in his eyes? You must say that he should praise it and enhance its value in his eyes and refrain from causing him anguish. Right? Someone just bought something and they're very excited about it. What do you say? All right. From here, the sages said a person's disposition should always be empathetic with mankind, right? And treat everyone courteously. In this case, too, once the groom has married his bride, one praises her as being fair and attractive, because at a minimum, that is how she appears in the eye of the groom. And you should always hew towards empathy rather than honesty in all cases.
Why is it only focusing on physical attributes though?
Well, I'm going to say, again, answer that in a couple of ways. One, oftentimes one doesn't know the bride. All right. So, I mean, we've all been invited to weddings where we may know either the groom or the bride, and therefore we're kind of constrained by what we can say, recognizing that I'm assuming she chose a nice guy, but he looks so handsome in his tuxedo. I can get away with that one. It's superficial, yes, but if I'm meeting the bride or the groom for the first time at the chuppah, which is not uncommon, I can't really speak to what a decent, nice person either of them is, because I don't know them. So I think that's part of why the debate here is more on the level of the superficial. Okay, any other thoughts about that last passage between Hillel and Shammai? Right, so let's move on to the next one. Right, I apologize, the first couple words of the sentence got cut off. Excuse me. There were two non-Jews who wagered with each other and said, anyone who will go and aggravate Hillel to the point that he reprimands him will take 400 zuz. One of them said, I will aggravate him. All right. For 400 zuz, I'm willing to bait Hillel. Okay. That day that he chose to bother Hillel was Shabbat Eve, and Hillel was washing the hair on his head. He went and passed the entrance to Hillel's house, and in a demeaning manner said, who here is Hillel? Who here is Hillel? Hillel wrapped himself in a dignified garment and went out to greet him. Hillel said to him, my son, what do you seek? He said to him, I have a question. Hillel said to him, ask, my son, ask. The man asked him, why are the heads of Babylonians oval? Right? He was alluding to and attempting to insult Hillel, who was himself Babylonian. He said to him, my son, you have asked a significant question. The reason is because they do not have clever midwives. They do not know how to shape the child's head at birth. All right. I mean, we all know that, there's a certain malleability to babies' heads when they are born. It allows them to pass through the birth canal and whatever. But I never really envisioned midwives sort of going like, here, let me see what I can do here. But, okay, Hillel answers the question. The man went away and waited 1 hour and returned to look for Hillel and said, who here is Hillel? Who here is Hillel? Again, Hillel wrapped himself and went out to greet him. Hillel said to him, my son, what do you seek? The man said to him, I have a question to ask. He said to him, ask, my son, ask. The man asked, why are the eyes of the residents of Tadmor bleary? Hillel said to him, my son, you have asked a significant question. The reason is because they live among the sands, and the sand gets into their eyes. And that's why they look bleary-eyed all the time. Once again, the man went and waited 1 hour and returned and said, who here is Hillel? Who here is Hillel? Again, Hillel wrapped himself and went out to greet him. He said to him, my son, what do you seek? He said to him, I have a question to ask. He said to him, ask, my son, ask. The man asked, why do Africans have wide feet? I don't want to get into any of the stereotypes that all of this suggests. All right. So we're just going to park that somewhere else for the moment. Hillel said to him, you have asked a significant question. The reason is because they live in marshlands and their feet widen to enable them to walk through those swampy areas. The man said, by the way, just to appreciate storytelling motif, you have iteration, reiteration, and then the third iteration changes things. So here, the man doesn't just go away. He says, I have many more questions to ask, but I am afraid lest you get angry. Hillel wrapped himself and sat before him and said to him, all of the questions you have to ask. The man got angry and said to him, are you Hillel, whom they call the Nasi of Israel? He said to him, yes. The man said to him, if it is you, then may there not be many like you in Israel. Hillel said to him, my son, for what reason do you say this? The man responds, because I lost 400 zoos because of you. Hillel said, be vigilant of your spirit and avoid situations of this sort. Hillel is worthy of having you lose 400 zoos and another 400 zoos on my account, and Hillel would not get upset. Right? Better you should be out 400 zoos than I should, behave in a way that is inappropriate for me as a leader in Israel, as a sage. The sages taught. Now, this is the one that everybody knows. There was an incident involving one Gentile who came before Shammai. The Gentile said to Shammai, how many Torahs do you have? He said to him, 2, the written Torah and the oral Torah. The Gentile said to him, with regard to the written Torah, I believe you, but with regard to the oral Torah, I do not believe you. Convert me on condition that you will teach me only the written Torah. Shammai scolded him and cast him out with a reprimand. Right? The same Gentile came before Hillel, who converted him and began teaching him Torah. On the first day, he showed him the letters of the alphabet and said to him, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, etc., etc. The next day, he reversed the order of the letters and told him that an Aleph is a Tav and so on. The convert said to him, but yesterday, you did not tell me that. Hillel said to him, you see that it is impossible to learn what is written without relying on an oral tradition. Did you not rely on me? Therefore, you should also rely on me with regard to the matter of the oral Torah and accept the interpretations that it contains. Okay. Again, the Gemara here is setting up a significant contrast between Hillel and Shammai in their disposition and how they deal with people who are intentionally being difficult. And now the really famous one. There was another incident involving one Gentile who came before Shammai and said to Shammai, "Convert me on condition that you teach me the entire Torah while I am standing on one foot." Shammai pushed him away with the builder's cubit in his hand. All right. That, by the way, is the precursor to the ruler of a slightly previous era. All right. The same Gentile came before Hillel. Hillel converted him and said to him, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to another. That is the entirety of Torah. The rest is interpretation. Go study." We all know this story, right? Okay. Time goes by. The same Gentile came before Hillel and said to him, "Hillel the patient, may blessings rest upon your head as you brought me under the wings of the divine presence." From this, the Gemara relates, eventually, the three converts, there are actually three different converts that happen in between. I spared you some of the lengthy narrative, gathered together in one place, and they said, "Shammai's impatience sought to drive us from the world. Hillel's patience brought us beneath the wings of the divine presence." So what's all this in here for? Tell me all these wonderful stories about Hillel the patient and Shammai the not so patient.
It's trying to compare and contrast two different teaching styles, one of absolute interpretation and adherence without a consideration for how it affects people, and the other where you look to fit what the person needs and empathize with them so that they can start, at the very least, start and then build and grow in their own pace and fashion.
Okay, absolutely true. Do you think the Gemara has a preference for one over the other?
Well, considering that all the publicity and advertisements contained within these stories are all towards Hillel, I'd say that the media is biased in his favor.
Yeah, one could say that the Gemara is biased in favor of Hillel, but remember that Shammai, for as much as he gets some bad press here, right? Shammai coexists with Hillel, and Hillel coexists with Shammai, and in fact, they are perceived as essential to each other. Right? We always talk about Hillel and Shamai. We talk always about the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. Right? And by the way, here we go again. Rabbi Abba said that Shmuel said, for 3 years, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagreed. Right? These said, the halacha is in accordance with our opinion. And these said, the halacha is in accordance with our opinion. Ultimately, a divine voice emerged and proclaimed, Elu va'elu divrei Elohim chaim, both these and these are the words of the living God. But, or however, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel. All right? Shocking, I know, Beit Hillel wins the dispute. That could have been predicted based on the previous passages. But the Gemara asked the question, since the Bat Kol itself affirms that both the words of the school of Hillel and the words of the school of Shammai are in fact the word of a living God, right? It doesn't say that they're wrong. It doesn't say that they're illegitimate. If anything, this passage puts the ultimate imprimatur of legitimacy on the teachings of the school of Shammai. They too are the word of God. So The Gemara now has to come up with a reason why Beit Hillel is privileged to have the halakha established in accordance with their position and their opinion. Because if A is the word of God and B is the word of God, how do I pick? All right. The Gemara answers its own question. The school of Hillel were agreeable and forbearing, showing restraint when affronted, and when they taught the halakha, they would teach both their own statements and the statements of Beit Shammai. Moreover, when they formulated their teachings and cited a dispute, they prioritized the statements of Beit Shammai to their own statements in deference to Beit Shammai. The school of Hillel really embraced this model of Elu divrei Elohim chaim, that both these and these are the legitimate expressions of godly intentionality. That these and these are both legitimate, true interpretations of what God might want us to do. That's a very powerful thing. Most of the time, we are not all that interested in the positions that we reject. And if we cite them, we usually do it only to set them up as a straw man to be torn down. And the Gemara then continues a little later down. This is to teach that anyone who humbles himself, the Holy One, blessed be he, exalts him, and anyone who exalts himself, the Holy One, blessed be he, humbles him. Anyone who seeks greatness, greatness flees from him, and conversely, anyone who flees from greatness, greatness pursues him. And anyone who attempts to force the moment and expends great effort to achieve an objective precisely when he desires to do so, the moment forces him to, and he is unsuccessful. And conversely, anyone who is patient and yields to the moment stands by his side, and he will ultimately be successful. So what's the Gemara ultimately trying to parse out from this passage? What are the defining attributes, not just of Hillel, but of the school of Hillel, that make them worthy of God picking them?
Patience.
Patience,
Humility and a recognition of the validity of other people's opinions.
patience, and by the way, humility is an essential quality if you're going to recognize the legitimacy of others. You know, the certitude is where I think you get tripped up. Now, based on this so far, how do you think Hillel and Shammai and the schools of Hillel and Shammai got along with each other?
I would assume that they communed fairly well, especially Hillel's attitude towards Shammai. I'm not so sure about Shammai's attitude towards Hillel, though.
Well, okay. So one might say, okay, wait a second. We're good, but we lose all the time. We're the Washington Generals of Jewish law, right? For those of you who didn't get the reference, they're the team that always lost to the Harlem Globetrotters. It's like this, yeah. You know what? Go away. I don't want to have anything to do with you. Could be a not surprising response. So the Gemara brings the following. But no, I'm going to skip over that one. Okay. The Gemara suggests, come in here. Although Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagreed with regard to several cases, an understatement, right? But here the Gemara is referring specifically to several cases related to marriage, right? Masechet Yevamot deals with marital issues, right? And they did not refrain from marrying women from each other's communities, even though the cases, and then Gemara lists all the various cases where they disagreed, including rival wives and sisters who required levirate marriage, or outdated bills of divorce that had been written but not delivered. And they disagreed with regard to an uncertain married woman, and they also disagreed with regard to one who divorces his wife and later lodges together with him at an inn. There's a whole host of activities related to marital relations that Hillel and Shammai and the schools of Hillel and Shammai disagree about. Right? Now, understand and appreciate that your conclusion with regard to some of these determines whether, in fact, the marriage is legitimate or not, and whether the children of said marriage are legitimate or not. So it's not like, well, we disagree as to whether or not that particular item is kosher or not. You don't think it's kosher? Fine, don't eat it. All right, it's not a big deal. You know, we're not talking about long-term personal status. Right? Despite the fact that these halachot entail important ramifications depending on whether or not these women are married, blah, 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 Beit Shammai did not refrain from marrying women from Beit Hillel, nor did Beit Hillel refrain from marrying women from Beit Shammai. All right? So it really emphasizes the two-way nature of this I don't know if partnership's the right word, but the two-way nature of this process. It served to teach that they practiced affection and camaraderie between them to fulfill that which is stated: love, truth, and peace. All right. Quote a verse from Zechariah. Right? For the schools of Hillel and the schools of Shammai, for them to truly be legitimate, authentic expressions of godliness and of Torah, which was asserted at the beginning of this passage of Gemara, they had, in fact, to behave this way. To not behave this way was, in fact, a betrayal of the truth of Torah and the peace of the community that the Torah seeks to inculcate. It is, in fact, only by asserting this commonality and communal nature that they are able to truly be what the bat kol, what the heavenly voice said they were, which was a legitimate expression of God and Torah. It's only by seeing community as the priority that they're able to do so. Okay, want to go to another famous story. I got two more famous stories for you, and then a few things to wrap up. Right? And this is known as the oven of Achnai. Right? The Gemara asks, what is the relevance of Achnai, a snake, in this context? Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmuel said it is characterized in this manner due to the fact that the rabbis surrounded it with their statements like this snake, which often forms a coil when at rest, and deemed it impure. Right? Don't get bogged down in the detail. It was just a prelude to the story, and it gives the name Achnai, gives us the name Achnai. All right, but the rabbis declared this particular type of oven to be ritually impure. All right, that because of the nature of how it was made, it always absorbed impurity. The sages taught. On that day, when they discussed this matter, Rabbi Eliezer answered all possible answers in the world to support his opinion, but the rabbis did not accept his explanations, right? Rabbi Eliezer is arguing against the position of the sages. After failing to convince the rabbis logically, Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, this carob tree, pointing out the window, will prove it. The carob tree uprooted itself and shot 100 cubits into the air. And the rabbi said to him, one does not cite halakhic proof or bring halakhic proof from a carob tree. Eliezer then said to them, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, the stream outside will prove it. And the stream turned and started flowing backwards. And the rabbis reject that too, because you don't bring proof about matters of halakha from a stream. Okay. All right. By the way, what underlies the tree shooting up into the sky and the stream flowing backwards? What makes those things happen? They're signs from heaven. All right. God is causing the tree to uproot itself and shoot into the sky and the stream to flow backwards. These are not normal occurrences. All right. So the suggestion is that God is on Rabbi Eliezer's side. Right. He goes on, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, the walls of the study hall will prove it. And the walls of the study hall leaned inward and began to fall. Rabbi Yoshua jumps up and says, if Torah scholars are contending with each other in matters of halakha, what is the nature of your involvement in this dispute? In other words, you have no place engaging in this conversation, stupid walls. And so the walls are sort of in a conundrum. They don't know what to do. So they don't want to fall because they respect Rabbi Yoshua, and they don't want to go straight because they respect Rabbi Eliezer. And so they stay there at sort of about a 45-degree angle. Again, the miraculous.
Rabbi, aren't the walls essentially, isn't the rabbi essentially saying, God, what are you doing getting involved in this dispute? It's between us human beings?
We're going to get there. All right,
Sorry.
we're going to get there more overtly. But yes, okay. Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, heaven will prove it. Which, by the way, heaven's already proved it 3 times. Right? And then a divine voice emerges from heaven and says, why are you differing with Rabbi Eliezer as the halakha is in accordance with his opinion in every place that he expresses an opinion? It's like, why are you arguing with him? He's right. He's always right. Rabbi Yoshua stands up and says, Lo b'shamayim hi. All right, what does he do? He quotes the Torah back to God. It's not in heaven. Right? And the Gemara asks the question, what's the relevance of him quoting that phrase? Rabbi Yirmiyah says, since the Torah was already given at Mount Sinai, we do not regard a divine voice as you already wrote at Mount Sinai in the Torah after a majority incline. In other words, the Torah is explicit in its instructions to the judges of any given era that the position of the majority determines what the halakha is. So it's very nice, bat kol, heavenly voice, that you want to weigh in on the side of Rabbi Eliezer, but you don't have a voice in this anymore, right? You, God, gave the Torah to us and gave us the authority and the mechanisms by which to interpret the Torah, and we go by the majority. So, butt out. Right? Yes, great chutzpah. I mean, let's face it, you don't tell off the Kadosh Baruch Hu lightly. Right? The Gemara relates, years afterwards, Rabbi Natan encountered Elijah the prophet and said to him, what did the Holy One, blessed be he, do at that moment? How does God react to being told to butt out? And he smiled. Elijah says, the Holy One, blessed be he, smiled and said, my children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me. Nitzchuni banai, nitzchuni banai. All right. God is amused. Right. And amused in a sort of a prideful kind of way is the sense that one gets here. That God is like, okay, they got me. It's true. All right, I gave them the authority and they're using it. And Taka maybe, right? All right, so that's usually where the story ends when most people tell it. But I think we need to read the real end of the story because there's more. The sages said, on that day, the sages brought all the ritually pure items deemed pure by the ruling of Rabbi Eliezer with regard to the oven and burned them in a fire. And the sages reached a consensus in his regard and ostracized him, right? God may have been okay with the majority, but the rabbis, in order to emphasize their authority, not only did they destroy all the things that Rabbi Eliezer had deemed to be ritually pure, they also ostracize him, right? But nobody wants to go tell him. Rabbi Akiva, who was his beloved disciple, said, I'll go because I don't want someone to do it in the wrong way. Right? And there's a danger here. Right? There's a concern that Rabbi Eliezer will react violently and destroy the entire world. That might be a bit of hyperbole. Okay. What did Rabbi Akiva do? He wore black and wrapped himself in black as an expression of mourning and pain and sat before Rabbi Eliezer at a distance of 4 cubits, which is the distance one must maintain from an ostracized individual. Rabbi Eliezer said to him, Akiva, what is different about today from other days that you comport yourself in this manner? Rabbi Akiva said to him, my teacher, it appears to me that your colleagues are distancing themselves from you. He employed euphemism as actually they distanced Rabbi Eliezer from them. Rabbi Eliezer too rent his garments and removed his shoes, as is the custom of an ostracized person, and he dropped from his seat and sat upon the ground. The Gemara relates, his eyes shed tears, and as a result, the entire world was afflicted. 1/3 of its olives were afflicted, 1/3 of its wheat, and 1/3 of its barley. And some say that even dough kneaded in a woman's hands spoiled. The sages taught there was great anger on that day, as any place that Rabbi Eliezer fixed his gaze was burned. And even Rabban Gamil, the Nasi of the Sanhedrin at Yavne, the head of the sages who were responsible for the decision to ostracize Rabbi Eliezer, was coming on a boat at the time, and a large wave swelled over him and threatened to drown him. Rabban Gamil said, it seems to me that this is only for the sake of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, as God punishes those who mistreat others. Right? What's going on? Why, the first part of the story asserts and affirms the majority position and that the majority controls the decision-making process. But what's going on in this next part of the story?
They took their decision-making process and instead of turning it into something that built community, actually turned it against community by essentially ostracizing and obviating the importance of a person who has been a very large part of the community, a very beneficial part of the community.
And they betrayed the idea of Elu va'elu divrei Elohim chaim. It's not that what Rabbi Eliezer said was wrong. In fact, he was correct. The fact that he was outvoted didn't change the fact that his position still had cogency and legitimacy as an expression of Torah, as an expression of God's desire. Right? That it's the same thing as Hillel and Shamai. It's Hillel and Shamai debate, discuss, argue. Ultimately, someone has to emerge victorious. All right. And here the Gemara has asserted that it's the majority that decides and not some external heavenly voices. Right? But in punishing Rabbi Eliezer, they went too far. And now Rabban Gamliel, who's on a boat that's about to capsize, stands up on his feet and says, Master of the universe, it is revealed and known before you that neither was it for my honor that I acted when I ostracized him, nor was it for the honor of the house of my father that I acted. Rather, it was for your honor, so that disputes will not proliferate in Israel. And in response, the sea calms from its raging. Right? What's Rabban Gamliel's defense?
He basically said he did it for the greater community.
Right. I'm trying to obviate controversy and strife and conflict and disagreement. Right? Now, did he go about it the best way possible? Probably not. Right? And in fact, the story's not quite over yet either. The Gemara further relates, Ima Shalom, the wife of Rabbi Eliezer, was the sister of Rabban Gamliel. All right. Now, talk about how this had to be fun at Thanksgiving dinner. From that incident forward, she would not allow Rabbi Eliezer to lower his head and recite the Tachanun prayers, which include supplication and entreaty. She feared that were her husband to bemoan his fate and pray at that moment, her brother would be punished. A certain day was around the day of the new moon, and she inadvertently substituted a full 30-day month for a deficient month, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Basically, she messed up the dates. Ignore that part for now. Some say that a pauper came and stood at the door and she took bread out to him. The result was that she left her husband momentarily unsupervised. When she returned, she found him and saw that he had lowered his head in prayer. She said to him, "Arise, you already killed my brother." Meanwhile, the sound of the shofar emerged from the house of Rabban Gamliel to announce that the Nasi had died. Rabbi Eliezer said to her, "From where did you know that your brother would die?" She said to him, "This is the tradition I received from the house of the father of my father. All the gates of heaven are apt to be locked, except the gates of prayer for the victims of verbal mistreatment." Wow. Right? So this doesn't end, and it doesn't end well. Right? Rabban Gamliel's orchestration of the ostracization of his brother-in-law, on one level, even if he wants to argue that he did it for the greater good, he did it in such a way that brought nothing but demise and death, because in fact, he negated the legitimacy and the sanctity of Rabbi Eliezer and his teaching. The stories a story like this is not preserved in the Gemara, other than, I think, to be a warning. And it's a warning that's not often or always heeded. I want to just fast forward for a moment about a millennium, all right? And many of you know that Rambam, Maimonides, was not always as venerated in his own day as he has come to be some almost 900 years after his death. And in fact, there were those who literally burned his books. There was one fellow who was involved in such activity, Nachum Garondi, all right? And when he saw that the local authorities picked up on his book burning activity by burning other sacred books of Jewish tradition, he realized what a horrible thing he had done. and he sets out on a journey, and he goes to the grave of Rambam, throws himself down on the grave and asks for forgiveness, and for the rest of his life goes around teaching Rambam's teachings. That's his penance for what he had done. But it's a product of that same verbal mistreatment. He spoke out in ways that did not appreciate and affirm the Elu va'elu divrei Elohim chayim, the multiplicity of possible rabbinic interpretations as legitimate expressions of godliness. Okay. All right. Very famous Mishnah. All right. Moses received the Torah at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great assembly. They said three things: be patient in the administration of justice, raise many disciples, and make a fence around the Torah. On one level, I'm a little less concerned about what they said, but what's the point of starting Pirkei Avot this with a chain of transmission? Right? Moses to Joshua, to the prophets, to the elders, to the men of the great assembly, to us.
It essentially passes Torah down into the hands of the rabbis, doesn't it?
Torah and authority. All right. I emphasize the word authority because it comes into play in the next thing. All right. This also may be a known story. Upon hearing that Rabbi Yoshua had challenged his ruling, Rabban Gamil sent a message to him saying, I decree against you that you must appear before me with your staff and your money on the day on which Yom Kippur occurs according to your calculation. According to my calculation, that day is the 11th of Tishrei, the day after Yom Kippur. Okay. We jump into the middle of a story here, but in the ancient world, the Jewish calendar was not something that you picked up at Price Chopper. The calendar was set on a month-to-month basis when witnesses would come and attest to the fact that they saw the first crescent of the new moon the previous night, and they would send word to the temple, and they would add musaf, the sacrifices, and that's how things worked. And that continued even after the destruction of the temple, whereby the calendar was set based on observation, and whether it was a leap year or not was also set by observation. Literally, the Beit Din, when the new month was approaching, would go and look and say, crops are looking a mite green still, but not green in a good sort of ripening sort of way, like in a not such a ripe sort of way. And that way they knew that when they declared the new month, they would make it a leap year and push the month of Nisan off a month to allow for another 4 weeks of growth, and thereby have the first ripened crops and the first fruits so that they would fall appropriately for Pesach and Shavuot. All right. The previous section deals with all sorts of disagreements as to when the calendar falls. Rabbi Yoshua and Rabban Gamliel disagree on when Yom Kippur falls. Because if you disagree as to whether today is the first day of the month or tomorrow is the first day of the month, well, then 10 days later, based on each calculation, is Yom Kippur. All right, well, not small stuff. Okay, Rabbi Akiva went and found Rabbi Yoshua distressed that the head of the great Sanhedrin was forcing him to desecrate the day that he maintained was Yom Kippur. In an attempt to console him, Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Yoshua, I can learn from a verse that everything that Rabban Gamliel did in sanctifying the month is done, namely that it's valid. As it is stated in the book of Leviticus, these are the appointed seasons of the Lord, sacred convocations which you shall proclaim. The verse indicates that whether you have proclaimed them at their proper time or whether you have declared them not at their proper time, I only have these festivals as established by representatives of the Jewish people. In other words, Rabban Gamliel did exactly what Rabban Gamliel was supposed to do. He decided when Yontif is. That's his job. Whether he was right or whether he was wrong almost is inconsequential because God gave him the authority to do it. Rabbi Yoshua then came to Rabbi Dosa ben Horkanas and said to him, if we come to debate and question the rulings of the court of Rabban Gamliel, we must debate and question the rulings of every court that has stood from the days of Moses until now. If you persist, then you're opening the Pandora's box of invalidating everything that has existed up to now. All right. And then he brings a passage from the book of Exodus. Then Moshe went up, and Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel. And why were the names of these 70 elders not specified? Not because they were being nice to the Baal Koreh. That wouldn't have been it. Rather, it comes to teach that every set of 3 judges that stands as a court over the Jewish people has the same status as the court of Moses. Since it is not revealed who sat on that court, apparently it is enough that they were official judges in a Jewish court. The legitimacy of the process takes primacy over the persons involved. When Rabbi Yoshua heard that even Rabbi Dosa ben Horkanas maintained that they had to submit to Rabban Gamliel's decision, he took his staff and his money in his hand and went to Yavne to Rabban Gamliel on the day on which Yom Kippur occurred according to Rabbi Yoshua's calculation. Right? Now look at Rabban Gamliel's reaction. Upon seeing him, Rabban Gamliel stood up and kissed him on his head and said to him, "Come in peace, my teacher and my student. You are my teacher in wisdom, as Rabbi Yoshua is wiser than anyone else in his generation, and you are my student as you accepted my statement despite your disagreement." Right? Basically, Rabbi Yoshua is willing to humble himself and affirm the integrity of the process. And Rabban Gamliel is very eager to praise Rabbi Yoshua for his willingness to accept authority and validate the legitimacy of the decision-making process within the Jewish community. The Jewish community can't operate with multiple calendars. It can't be Yom Kippur for you on one day and Yom Kippur for me on another day. That destroys the unity of the Jewish people. All right? But the fact that Rabban Gamliel acknowledged Rabbi Yoshua's disagreement keeps it in step with the idea of Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim Chaim, that these and these are legitimate expressions of interpretation and valued, even though one of them has to be wrong or one of them has to be rejected, maybe not even wrong. Okay, I'm going to go through this next one very quickly. The context here are behaviors that happen on Shabbat that ought not happen on Shabbat. The Gemara answers, it was taught in the Tosefta, the cow was not his, rather it was his neighbor's, and because he did not protest her conduct and tell her that doing so is prohibited, the cow was called by his name to his discredit as if it were his. In other words, according to the Gemara, this becomes associated with the person who allowed the mistake, the improper conduct to proliferate. it was related that Rav and Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Chaviva taught the statements cited below. The Gemara comments, throughout the order, so forget that part. Okay. In any event, they said, anyone who had the capability to effectively protest the sinful conduct of the members of his household and did not protest, he himself is apprehended for the sins of the members of his household and punished. If he is in a position to protest the sinful conduct of the people of his own town, and he failed to do so, he is apprehended for the sins of the people of his own town. If he is in a position to protest the sinful conduct of the whole world, and he fails to do so, he is apprehended for the sins of the whole world. All right, so what's the Gemara getting at here?
That you have to take responsibility and action and not sit passively by and allow things to occur and assume
When improper activity is going on.
Yeah.
Improper, right? Henrietta Moore in a text called Protest Politics and the Ethical Imagination wrote, protest, like marriage, means reimagining relations to self and others. The Taksim, she brings an example, the Taksim Square Book Club, in which demonstrators in Istanbul stood silently and read books, used reflection as a riposte to state brutality. Ethical imagination is at the root of this. It is impossible to explain social and political transformations without linking them to personal hopes and aspirations. Politics, like love, involves an attachment to others. The I makes no sense without the you, nor the self without the other. Without a sense of others and of our difference from them, we have no sense of self, because the not me is a constitutive element of the self. So how does Moore's statement expand or illustrate this passage from the Talmud? That's a hard question.
I think he's saying that you have to see yourself as part of a whole and not just as yourself isolated.
Correct, right? And in fact, the diversity is in fact that which enables me to see myself more clearly, to understand myself more clearly. Hillel and Shamai grow to understand themselves and Torah better because of their dialogue, because of their discourse, because of their disagreement, but they don't allow it to obfuscate for them the broader sense of oneness of community and the broader sense of purposefulness of their endeavor, which is to try to understand what God wants and what God demands and expects of them as teachers of Torah, as exponents of Torah, as exemplars of Torah. And I could, I suppose, by extension, argue that what is true for us in this realm is no less true in all the other realms wherein we invest leaders with authority to act. And in fact, it is our hope that the leaders will recognize the legitimacy, the authenticity, and the shared love of the endeavor that the people on the other side of the equation and the discussion have as well. That the us versus them is actually not the intent. For Torah, it's how to best assert what it is that God wants of me going forward. Translated into other realms, how do I further the interests of the society as a whole? How do I better the society as a whole? How do I move forward the agenda of the whole nation? Not as an us versus them, because the minute you have the us versus them that doesn't recognize the unity of purpose, then everything collapses. And that's, by the way, the difference between the last two stories in the Gemara. When Rabbi Elazar is ostracized, it is the assertion of the Rabban Gamliel and the majority to negate him and to deny him legitimacy and his role as part of the process of the unfolding of Torah as the expression of Jewish society and civilization. But Rabban Gamliel, the same Rabban Gamliel, is quick to affirm and embrace Rabbi Yoshua as a partner in the process. Rabbi Eliezer allowed his sense of rightness to get the better of him. Yes, God's on my side. I can prove that God's on my side, but that's not how society works. Rabbi Yoshua, even if he was right, recognized that there's a systemic need of the society that overcomes his own sense of rectitude. In the first story, neither Rabban Gamliel or Rabbi Eliezer have the requisite humility to see the elu va'elu, that the legitimacy of the other and the other's viewpoint. Whereas Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua are able to preserve that and therefore can bring shalom bayit to their community. I want to end with a short poem by Yehuda Amichai.
Rabbi, could I ask one question?
Of course.
In terms of Rabbi Gamliel, if he truly believed that both he and his colleague could have a similar opinion or similarly valid opinion, should I say, not a similar opinion, but a valid opinion, why would he essentially jack him by forcing him to either commit a sin, essentially, or ignore his request to appear? Why wouldn't he set it for a week later or something when he knew that there would be no conflict at all?
Because that well, first of all, it makes for a lousy story.
Granted, and I, to be quite frank, in reading that story, I heard the music from The Godfather playing in the background throughout it.
All right. But ultimately, the story works only because Rabbi Yoshua is willing to cede and accept the reality of what Rabbi Dosa and others are teaching him or telling him, that Rabban Gamliel's authority to set the calendar is in fact both absolute and necessary to preserve the unity of the community. You literally can't have everybody making Yom Tov for themselves, right? By the way, we've had examples of that. All right, the Samaritans make Yom Tov, theoretically observe our calendar, but they don't. The whatchamacallums, the Karaites, right? Ultimately, every time there has been a lack of unity in terms of calendar, we end up with fissures and splinters, or communities that have split off from the Jewish people because literally and figuratively, they're not observing Yom Tov at the same time. That's why he has to appear on the day that he would have argued was Yom Kippur, but ultimately the system requires that there's only one day of Yom Kippur. And Rabbi Yoshua is willing to cede his sense of, I know my calculations are correct, in favor of the greater good of not undermining the authority of the system and the process by which decision-making is made, in order to affirm the unity of the people. Okay? and affirm the position that the position of the majority is in fact the position that determines what Jewish law is, more or less. So this lovely little poem by Yehuda Amichai serves as both a good closure and a good warning. The place where we are right. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard, but doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. It's a very powerful poem for me because it's a reminder that the more we stand our ground, the more we insist on our rectitude, the more we foreclose the possibility of something better and more beautiful growing. So, as one of my teachers used to say, Adkan, until here. Let me wish everyone a Chag Sameach for the roughly 20 some odd minutes of Yom Tov that are left. And thank you for the opportunity for studying Torah together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sameach.
Sameach.
Chag Sameach, everyone.
See you in the morning,
Yes.
Yep.
8 o'clock.
Yes, but no Takanoon.
Okay, have a good night.
Early news.
Go eat some ice cream.
Amen.
Amen. Get us out of here. Let's see.